Hey, what's up? Good morning, people. Just wanted to do a quick stream today about something that is really important. It might seem small to some people, but it's actually really a important topic that we should talk about. We're going to be discussing a man today called Thomas John Cottle, or just John Cottle. He was a slave owner in the island of Nevis in the 18th century. He is somebody who is considered to be some sort of lenient slave owner. This is from our own tourism authorities, where they put him up to be some sort of model for society. And today we're going to just go through a quick presentation to really figure out if this person was actually, as they say, some nice guy, some great guy, right? Yeah, this is important because our people tend to lionize enslavers, and we're going to go through this quick presentation to see if this man was really who they said he was. There might be some music in the background. There's something happening across the street from me. So if you hear anything, I apologize, but I can't do nothing about it right now. So let me share my screen quickly. Right, so we're talking about Thomas John Cottle, a man who is called a lenient slave owner, plantation owner, and philanthropist. So Thomas John Cottle was born into a wealthy slave owning family on Nevis to his father, Thomas Cottle, who became the Solicitor General of St. Kitts, and Grace Bell, his mother, in 1761. Now, understand that during that time, St. Kitts and Nevis, we talk about now, is in the height of slave ownership. I mean, slavery is at the absolute peak in 1761. This is the society in which John Cottle is born into. He ended up inheriting Round Hill slave estate from his father and became the president of the island of Nevis multiple times between 1803 and 1816. He married a lady called Frances Hawkins, who would be called Fanny as a nickname, the daughter of the powerful and wealthy and extremely savage slave owner, a man called Edward Hawkins, who will come into play later on in this discussion. They ended up having 3 children. So Round Hill Estate at the time of John Cottle's inheritance was about 500 acres. Round Hill, I think, is located in the north of the island. And according to property returns, or the audits of the property during the ownership of Cottle, Round Hill held captive 151 African people in 1817, 149 Africans in 1822, 140 in 1825, and 133 in 1828. The number went back up at the time of emancipation. So we see here that Cottle was quite was quite successful in the human property business. Round Hill became the site of what Cottle is best known for. This is why he's called this great man, this lenient slave owner. He built a Anglican chapel, which was the first of its kind to allow white and black people to worship together. Yeah, I think in the Caribbean, or the British Caribbean. I'm talking about Protestant Caribbean. This is the church. This is the ruin of the church, sorry. It opened in 1824, 4 years before the death of Cottle, for the purposes of worship for Cottle, his family, and also his human property. The church was built by the very same people who Cottle enslaved We're talking about the black people, the African people who Cottle forced to build this church. So Cottle is described as a plantation owner and philanthropist. A philanthropist is supposed to be somebody who is here for the charitable good of the society, of the country at large. He was a devout Anglican. The Anglican Church is, of course, the Church of England. He was considered a very lenient slave owner, and that line comes directly from the Nevis Island tourism website, a very lenient slave owner. He's considered an ameliorist. Ameliorist in the dictionary is considered someone who is an adherent or an advocate of the doctrine that the world or society may be improved and suffering alleviated through rightly directed human effort. All these things will come into play later. So this plaque you're seeing here was originally mounted in the church he built, the little chapel he built. And in case you can't see what it says, I have attempted to write out, hopefully accurately, what it says. This is how John Cottle is remembered by his friends and the people in society. He's remembered as a fond father, an affectionate husband, a kind relative and sincere friend, and generous in his intercourse with society, and to his Negroes, a mild and humane master, ever anxious to promote their temporal benefit and proving his regard to their external happiness. By the erection of this chapel for the improvement, in whatever point of view his character is contemplated, he was a pattern for imitation. Courteous in manners, conferring favors as in receiving, ripe in wisdom, constant in friendship, ardent in piety. He showed how well could be united the gentleman and the Christian. Continued, he goes on to call him loved and honored by all who knew him. He has quitted this world in which he lived, as always dying, and in the last great day shall rise pure through his Saviour's blood, to mingle with saints and the angels through the ages of immeasurable duration. May we die the death of the righteous, and may our last end be like his. What a man. What a man. If you read this for anybody, you would think this person is the greatest person on earth. What a man. We move on. So this sign you're seeing here on the side, I want to thank Karl for taking this picture for me. The sign was actually laid there by the Nevis tourism people. It's part of the Nevis Heritage Trail, and it marks the site of Cottle Church. It reads, English planter Thomas Cottle built his church on land he inherited from his father, who became Solicitor General of St. Kitts. The church was planned as a place where his own family and those of his slaves could worship together. While many of the plantation owners still favored slavery, Cottle worked to improve the conditions of slaves, educate them, and convert them. Let's stop here for a second. And we're going to talk about this slide and the slide before, right? So let me start with this one here first. This sign was laid by, I don't know the background of the people who laid this sign, but you could see the person who typed this is struggling with some form of cognitive dissonance. Either that or they're real disingenuous. See, we have a problem in St. Kitts and Nevis with simply telling the truth about our colonial oppressors. We want to start with the last part. It says, while many of the plantation owners still favored slavery, Cottle worked to improve the conditions of the slaves, educate them, and convert them. Now, you would think after saying, while many of the plantation owners still favored slavery, the very next line would be, Cottle manumitted his slaves, or his enslave people. Sorry. You would think that, but it doesn't say that. It says Carroll worked to improve the conditions of his slaves. So basically, Carroll was just like all the other plantation owners who still favored slavery. He favored slavery. Why are you starting off by saying, well, many of the plantation owners still favored slavery? Carroll favored slavery too. At no point in time have you read that Carroll was some guy who was for the abolition of slavery. This sign speaks to the problem we have in St. Kitts and Nevis, where we tend to write these things. I don't know if we're afraid to offend the people, maybe his descendants, maybe the people that are the same race as him that come here. I don't know what it is. When you put these signs, it is dangerous to the people who read them, especially the descendants of the formerly enslaved people. The plaque that we read from before, that was what his friends, the other white people, thought of Carl. How then does the enslaved, his human property, the descendants of those people, also come back to try and protect Carl's legacy? If you wanted to write something, simply say he's a slave owner who built a church to what? That's fine. Carl is known for building a church and having the enslaved people come and worship there. But don't try and act like Carl was some great person saying that some plantation owners favored slavery, as if Carl didn't favor slavery. Carl was considered an ameliorist, not an abolitionist. He still held and profited from the labor of Africans. Carl never spoke about emancipating Africans. Instead, he argued for the good of the colonies and Britain. Slavery must continue. The excerpt below is from carlchurch.org. In a statement published in 1811, Carl expressed his own views. He was no friend of slavery, but given that it was still a part of the British government, it was still policy of the British government, he was bound to support it. Quote, until a way is found to reconcile the interest of the proprietor with the liberty of the slave. He went on to say that since the colonies were already in debt to the mother country, suddenly to overturn the prevailing system would lead to economic ruin for the colonies, proprietors and slaves alike. Indeed, such was his fear of slave uprising that in a dispute between Edward Hawkins and James Tobin, Carl took the part of Hawkins, his father-in-law. I told you Edward Hawkins would come into play again, even going so far to claim that black people suffered less than white. That was John Cottle, the man who was so kind and humane and mild to his Negroes. Here is John Cottle arguing based on economics. He had to support slavery for the good of the colonies and the British government. He says, until a way is found to reconcile the interest of the proprietor and the liberty with the slave, we will see again that there is still no way to reconcile the interest with the proprietor. That is impossible. The proprietor wants to keep the enslaved person enslaved. He wants to benefit from the enslaved person. He wants to exploit the enslaved person. The enslaved person, on the other hand, wants to be free from exploitation, wants to be free to chart his or her own course. There's no way to reconcile the interests of both parties. But Carl knows this, but he's using fancy jargon and all this sort of obfuscation to mask the fact that he's simply a man who is in favor of keeping the people enslaved. There's nothing kind or mild about John Cottle. He's just like any other slave-holding person in the Americas. That is why I find the sign at Cottle Church, and that is why I find the write-up on the Nevis tourism website so offensive. when you call him a very lenient slave owner. Thus far, has anything here spoken to a lenient slave, a kind man? The man agreed with Edward Hawkins, one of the most vile persons in the history of slave owning British Caribbean, that black people suffered less than white. This 1811 excerpt will come into play in the next slide. I didn't make this up. This comes from carrollchurch.org. This is the Edward Hawkins affair of 1810. The source is Out of Crowded Vagueness by Brian Dye. A very good book. I own the hard copy of the book. It was a bit difficult to find, but I own the hard copy and the PDF. So I want to encourage y'all to go read the book. You can find it on Amazon, and I think some local places here still sell it. Read the book from cover to cover and learn something. So this excerpt here is talking about a situation where Edward Hawkins' son, Peter Hawkins, is losing control of the plantation that Edward Hawkins has handed over to him. So it starts up here, starts somewhere up here. So it says some of the latter who had been sold together with an estate he had bought in 1808, then placed under the supervision of one of his sons, proved particularly troublesome, either by running away in small groups or by feigning illness. This was, of course, the ways enslaved people resisted enslavement. Try slow up your walk, or they just run away from the plantation. As a result, by the beginning of 1810, the son, Peter Hawkins, had to all intents and purposes lost control of the estate. Sorry. This so infuriated his father that on 23rd January, he ordered Peter to take the worst behaved slaves, 10 men and 10 women, under 2 trusted slave drivers to the marketplace in Charlestown. Once there, the drivers were set to work flogging each slave in turn, a process which took a very long time and was witnessed by a large crowd. Among the onlookers were 3 magistrates, bracket, one being another of Hawkins' son, who's also named Edward. So you see, these people have pretty much stacked up every part of society with their kith and kin. The magistrates, all of that are their people. And the deputy secretary of the island, John Burke. Edward Hawkins Sr. seems to have had no set punishment in mind, possessed nothing in the way of humanity, and had no intention of observing the law, which prohibited cruel punishments. No 2 slaves received the same number of lashes, and the women suffered just as much as the men, and the length of the floggings varied enormously. The first to suffer was a man who was whipped non-stop for about 15 minutes. After that, Burke took it upon himself. Remember, Burke is the deputy secretary of the island. Took it upon himself to count the number of lashes given to each of the other 19. In the end, finding these ranged between 47 and 242 for the men, and from 49 to 291 for the women. A week later, the Nevis Assembly passed a resolution stating that Hawkins had been guilty of barbarity altogether unprecedented in this island, and at the beginning of May, he was brought to trial, accused of administering excessive floggings, as he was prosecuted in a half-hearted fashion by a lawyer named James Weeks before a jury packed with men beholden to the defendant in one way or another. His eventual acquittal came as very little surprise to anyone on the island. Who makes an appearance here? The president of the council, Thomas Cottle, who was Hawkins' son-in-law and whose estate attorney had been a juror, showed his approbation by recommended weeks for the post of the Chief Justice. So let me finish up before I start here. Outside the island, it was a very different matter. The Governor General, Hugh Elliot, was so incensed by the verdict that later in the year, as we have seen, he told Lord Liverpool the island courts could no longer be trusted to provide justice, as there were not enough decent white men around to provide them with the proper judges and juries. And who is in the middle of this? The kind and lenient slave owner, Thomas John Cottle, president of the council. I want to remind you that the people got between 47 and 242. Men got that, strokes, and 49 to 291, almost 300 lashes for the women. Thomas John Cottle was in the middle of this as the president of the council. His father-in-law was the person that ordered this brutality, simply because the people on the estates were seeking to get themselves free. I thought Thomas Cottle was some man who loved black people so. He was this great man, as he's portrayed by the Nevis tourism authorities. James Weeks, who was the prosecutor, who, as said, he prosecuted the trial in a half-hearted fashion, is like Thomas Cottle tell James, look here, man, just go ahead up there, put on a show. When you finish with that, I will appoint you Chief Justice of the island. Also, Thomas Cottle's estate attorney was a juror. Thomas Cottle recommended Weeks for the post of Chief Justice. This was all in a way to get off his father-in-law, because his father-in-law was on trial for beating up some African people. How kind was this man? So far, I need somebody to tell me, how is it Thomas Cottle has gotten this wonderful reputation in Nevis? Well, because he built a church? Matter of fact, he didn't build a church. The enslaved people built a church. He forced them to build that church. What if those people had said no? They don't feel like building a church. What he would have done to them? But we're going to come back. We move. Here we go again with Edward Hawkins. Edward Hawkins, the father-in-law of Thomas John Cottle. This was from 1817, once again, out of Crowded Vehicles by Brian Dyke. Go and get the book. Read something, learn something, educate your children. Do not depend on our tourism authorities. Do not depend on anybody else to educate your children. Educate yourself, please. It reads, in the spring of 1817, while Daniel Davis, who was another individual who we will get at in another presentation, was struggling to sow the seeds of Christianity among the slaves in his Charlestown parish, Edward Hawkins was once again making free with the whip and inflicting suffering on other slaves in the north of the island. Where does it take place? This took place on March 28 at Round Hill Estate. Round Hill Estate, the very same estate where this wonderful church was to be built, the very same estate that is owned by Hawkins' son-in-law, Thomas Cottle, who was then in England, but on his estate. While visiting the estate in his capacity as Cottle's attorney, Hawkins was told by the estate manager, Francis Newton, that one of the slaves, William Nolan, and I pause here, I want you to realize that in 1810, Edward Hawkins was a part of one of the most brutal acts to African people in this part of the world, at that time especially. And by 1817 or whatever, Thomas Cottle had the nerve to appoint that man estate attorney for his estate while he was in England. William Nolan Francis Newton says William Nolan had broken into and robbed the house of another slave residing in the town of 3 pairs of stockings and 8 yards of calico, and that the receivers of the stolen goods would not bestow the property, and requested that Mr. Hawkins would interfere. Hawkins needed no second request to take action. The first of his 3 miscreants to be punished was one called Richard, who was found in possession of 1 pair of stolen stockings. Having been forced to lie down, he was then flogged by the driver with a cart whip. I reckoned 90 lashes whilst I was there. Newton, remember Newton is the estate manager, Francis Newton. Newton later, whilst I was there, Newton stated later, I then left the place and went upstairs where I live. During that time, the flogging continued. And after I had gone upstairs, which are a considerable flight of steps, and gone to a window, 3 lashes were given. To the best of my knowledge, he received altogether 100 lashes. Richard, whose crime was that he had some stolen goods, got 100 lashes. Make him lay down on the ground, splay him out, and give him 100 lashes. The next to suffer was a slave named David, who had also obtained a pair of stockings. He too was made to lie down, and Newton observed from his upstairs window that he received 80 lashes with the cart whip from the same driver. Nolan, who had already been flogged for the theft by Newton, remember William Nolan was the original person who they accused of the crime, he was already being flogged. So Nolan now was made to lie down and received 25 to 30 lashes more. All of this took place in front of the rest of the estate slaves, among whom were 2 women named Thisbe and Cressy. As the former, Thisbe, was Richard's sister, and the latter, Cressy, was David's half-sister, it is hardly surprising that long before the flogging was over, both were sobbing loudly. Their tears so annoyed Hawkins that as soon as the flogging of Nolan had ended, he had both girls pulled from the crowd, laid down, and each given at least 20 lashes. What a terrible thing. What a terrible thing. Let me start again. Their tears so annoyed Hawkins that as soon as the flogging of Nolan had ended, he had both girls pulled out of the crowd, laid down, and each given at least 20 lashes. 6 days later, after news of what had transpired had become common knowledge, 2 magistrates conducted an examination of a charge of cruelty against Hawkins. This led to a bill of indictment being drawn up by the grand jury and to Hawkins standing trial accused of cruelty under the Amelioration Act. And of course, who is acting? James Weeks. James Weeks was once again acted as the prosecutor, and once again only in a half-hearted manner. I didn't do the rest because, of course, Edward Hawkins got off. But I put this here because it once again puts Thomas Cottle's reputation as this great man to his Negroes in the forefront, in the spotlight. This happened on Thomas Cottle's plantation to his Negroes now, his enslaved people. There's no history, there's nothing that says Thomas Cottle ended up coming back and reprimanded his father-in-law. There's nothing that says he publicly denounced his father-in-law. He didn't use his position to in any way put his father-in-law into any serious trial. In fact, his puppet James Week was there to allow the man to go, put on a sham trial. 3 of his own people got 90 lashes, 100, 80. 80. You got other people getting 25 more, 25 to 30 more. And then 2 girls, just because they were sad that their brothers were being beaten within an inch of their life, were dragged out the crowd and them given 20 lashes, at least 20 lashes each. At least, which means it could have been more. This happened on Thomas Cottle's estate. Somebody tell me why Thomas Cottle is considered by the Nevis Tourism Authority to be a very lenient slave owner. The words itself don't go together. You can't be a lenient owner of people. These things are dangerous when you teach young people these things, because we know when we ask our young people to write essays and write SBAs, they pretty much look for the lowest hanging fruit. Who was Thomas Cottle? You're going to write up Thomas Cottle was a very lenient slave owner. Why? Because you went on the internet and you see a government site that you're supposed to trust. On the government site, it says he was a very lenient slave owner. That's a correct answer in school. It's a correct answer. According to the government website. You can't get them wrong. The government website says so. You cannot continue to do these things to our young people and poison their minds. You can't speak with the tongue of your oppressor. You can't see with the eyes and you can't hear with the ears. This is how they train us to think, to always protect them first, protect their property first, protect their children first. And even in death, we protect their reputation by making up lies about them. I was reading a scholar one time and the scholar said, these slave owners, this is a white English scholar, by the way, these people have been allowed to rebrand themselves. Slave owners, slave traders becomes sailors, merchant ships, sailors. Slave plantation owners have become planters, sugar merchants. And they rebranded themselves in life, and we continue to allow them to rebrand themselves in death. We rebrand them. We are protecting their reputation. How could that be right? We are still carrying on the same programming of a slave on a plantation, where the slave is taught to protect massa's property as much as possible. Protect massa as much as possible. Don't bring no harm to massa. Not even his reputation. Massa a good man. Massa a lenient slave owner. Yes, he is. On his plantation, a man got 90 lashes while he was there. But altogether, the man might have got 100 lashes. Another get 80, 25 to 35. And then 2 girls, the sisters of 2 of the enslaved men, got 20 lashes. And he doing this in front of the other slaves is not by coincidence. It was known that when you beat men, male slaves, in front of everybody else, you break the will of the rest of the plantation. When you beat them in front of everybody else, in front of the women, in front of the children, you instill fear in front of them. You instill fear in the child. Let me behave myself. See, let me don't try to run away because massa gonna beat me too. We move. So, what is his legacy in emancipation? This source is from the UK compensation logs. The compensation logs of the slave owners who got reparations for loss of human property. So Carl died in 1828. His estate went under management of his wife Frances, or Fanny, and was awarded 2,191 shillings, no pence, of which 1,000 was paid to his son. Nothing was paid to his beloved Africans. As you can see here, the excerpt down here, John M. Cottle, which is his son, got £1,000. Fanny Cottle got 1,191 and 3 shillings. 8th May 1837. Litigated claim 110. You can go and look it up as you feel like. If you want it, contact me. I will send you the entire slave log, the entire compensation logs, all of it. I mean, what else to say? Coming on to the end. Conclusion. Thomas John Cottle was like any other depraved enslaver. He was neither mild or humane. In fact, he was cowardly when presented with very clear savage violence towards his human property by his own family. Carl and his family benefited from the day he was born to the day he died from the enslavement of and abuse of African people. Our people must be brave enough to tell the truth about our enslavers and not attempt to dull the light from being shined on them because of our religious programming or the need to not offend our visitors of the same race or background. I want to go back to the slide, a slide before. You see this thing here? John Cottle makes sure that his memory was lionized by him and his friends. Karl himself just and generous in his intercourse with society, and to his Negroes a mild and humane master, ever anxious to promote the temporal benefits and bring his regard to their external happiness. Tell me how giving people 300 lashes. Tell me how giving people 80 lashes and 100 lashes and 90 lashes and then dragging out the sisters, and then you don't prosecute the man because he's your father-in-law. You don't prosecute him, but you are mild and humane master. You see here, he was a mild and humane master. That was what Thomas Cottle's white friends wrote about him, you know. And here you have the Nevis Tourism Authority following up, calling the man, which mirrors this, a very lenient slave master. What was lenient about him? Because he made the people him come church with him. Because he wanted his church to have in people, so he bring he human property, say, hey, come church. Suppose the people had said no, they don't want to come church. What would have happened to them? It is dangerous to our young people when we choose to tell these lies about our oppressors. When we choose to not tell the truth about it. You want to say John Cottle Church was built and Africans was worshiping it with the white people, fine. But when you go as far as to call a slave owner lenient, that is a problem. That is a problem. You are not Thomas Cottle. You are the descendant of the enslaved people who Thomas Cottle exploited in his life, who his father exploited, who his father's people exploited, all of that. Thomas Cottle kept exploiting those people even in death when his family got money for them. If you have the time, look up how much 2,191 pounds is now in today's money. I didn't do it. One of the reasons why we write this foolishness about Thomas Cottle being some lenient slave or some good man is because Thomas Cottle built a church. And let's face it, our people are trapped behind this wall of religion, where anybody who does something with a church can be wrong. Can be wrong. As long as anything having to do with church, we allow it. Even if the man used to abuse us, the Moravians said, you know, they said, you know, the Moravians said, and the Anglicans agreed, and the Methodists agreed, that when African people were enslaved, they made better slaves. Sorry, when they were converted, they made better slaves. because the teachings that they were getting from the Bible would make them docile, and they would harbor no ill will to white people. But that is why after a while there was this grand effort to convert Negroes as much as possible. They could not allow the people, mind you, the people could not practice their own religions from Africa. They couldn't speak the African languages. But they realized the people were just resisting them. So they had to get them converted, tricking them into believing, oh, I'm a good man. Master let me come church with him. Master is a good man. Thomas Cottle was not a good man. John Cottle was a wicked man. He was somebody who we should not remember in fondness. Do not teach your children he was no lenient slave owner. That is an oxymoron. The two of them don't go together. Ridiculous. And that is it from me. I want to keep this short and sweet. If you listen to this live, if you listen to it in the playback, let me know what you think. Peace out. Have a nice day. What's up to Lisa Bales? Thank you for listening to me. Anywho, that's it from me. Y'all tell me what y'all think in the playback. Peace out.